Hi, I'm Doug from 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast, and welcome to another episode of the Chickenhead Chronicles. This week, I want to talk about a brand new cartridge that is available from our friends at The Future Was 8-Bit. This is the Kung Fu Flash cartridge. Let me tell you a little bit about it. The cartridge itself was designed by Kim Jorgensen, and I'll have a link to his GitHub. And you can actually build one of these yourself, but it won't come in this awesome case with these awesome buttons and this awesome Future Was 8-Bit label. So I recommend buying it from them. Then you know you're getting a quality product. Now the Kung Fu Flash is a cartridge that can flash almost any kind of CRT or cartridge file for the Commodore 64 right onto this little beauty, and it will then emulate that cartridge, a perfect emulation of that cartridge. And I'll show you a list of the kind of things it can emulate in a bit, but one thing it does great is games. So if you've got a game on cartridge, a CRT file, works perfect. Now it can also, as an added benefit, work as a 1541 drive and mount D64, D71, or even D81 images. There are some limitations to that we will talk about, but it absolutely can do it, and it absolutely does work. It does it by using a little SD card that you slot right in there that's formatted in the FAT file system. And then you can just copy over CRT files, or you can copy over PRG files, .D64, D71, .D81, and then use the interface on this cartridge to launch them and use them. Now I need to preface this by telling you that this was designed with PAL or European models in mind, and that's where it works best. But as of a couple months ago, they released some beta NTSC firmware, which is what I'm using, and now it finally works pretty well in NTSC mode with a couple limitations that we'll kind of touch on. Now, one of the other perks of getting it from the Future Was 8-Bit is they have awesome Kung Fu Flash mugs. I mean, seriously, who doesn't want to drink coffee or tea out of a Kung Fu Flash mug that you can put on your Kung Fu Flash coaster? See, that's nice. See how that works? See? And Kung Fu Flash mousepad. Now, our European friends will know exactly who this gentleman with the emu puppet is, but we here in America, not a clue. Not a clue. Now, first and foremost, we need to look at this as a cartridge flash device, something we can flash cartridges to. That's what this little thing excels at, and that's why it's called the Kung Fu Flash. The other features, the ability to handle the .D64 and above files, just look at those as an added bonus. Now, virtually any game, CRT game, should work fine on here if you've got the CRT file, up to and including the later release things like the Ocean cartridges, which were, it seems like they were almost even possibly a megabyte on some of those, and 512K cartridges, like the 64GS, that failed game machine that Commodore came out with, used the 64GS format for the cartridges. Works perfect for things like Sarah Jane Avorys Soul Force, which was just released this January, and is a 512K cartridge file that you can download. Absolutely flawless on these little guys. So let's take a peek at how we can do this. Now, first off, I want to show you the machine that I'm going to be hooking it up to. This is my 64C, and this is my preferred Commodore 64 that I do almost all of my basic Commodore 64 stuff on. My 128 desktop, that thing barely ever even enters 64 mode. Now, I want to show off my cool little device that I just got here from a friend on Facebook who sold me a 1541 2 drive. Never owned one before. I've always just used this with the old 1541 beige ones, but they just don't look cool like the 1541 2 and the 1581 that's right on top of it. Just a match made in heaven now. Beautiful. Now, I've plugged the cartridge into my 64C, and you can see when I boot up, it comes with a nice little file browser, very similar to the file browser that's used with the SD to IEC that we're also used to using. Now, what you want to do with this SD card is on your PC or your Mac, you want to copy over your .d64s and your .crt files onto the SD card and put them in a logical location, you know, something alphabetical maybe, just so it's easy to find. If you end up, like I have, hundreds and hundreds of different files on there, just alphabetize them, makes your life easier. Let's take a look at the interface itself. Now you can control the interface with either the cursor keys or the joystick plugged into joystick port 2. Now, which one is joystick port 2 here? There we go. I like to use the cursor keys myself. You can go up and down, and when you want to go into a folder, like we'll go into this CBM folder, we'll just hit enter. We can go down to the Kung Fu Flash folder. This is where I happen to keep all of the .crt files I have. You can see we've got all kinds of them here, and including some like Epic's game cartridge, Easy Flash compilation. So compilation cartridges that contain a lot of flashed files. In this case, let's look at the GS64 version of Sarah Jane Avorys' new Soul Force. When we hit the enter key over that, programming flash memory, please do not power off. Cool. It's going to actually copy this over into the system's flash memory now. As soon as it does that, it will then launch the game or the program that you're using automatically. In this case, we'll skip over the cool little introduction here. Oh, isn't that sweet? In loving memory of my dad, may you rest in peace. That's so sweet, Sarah. So, of course, we have to change our options because only a fool would not play Soul Force with auto fire on. And you can just start your game like you normally would. You can see it runs at absolutely beautiful frame rate and speed in NTSC. We'll just play a few seconds of it here, show you some Soul Force. And I will be doing a full review of this, but I am waiting for my cartridge with all my little goodies to come in with it. What a great game this is. This is just an absolute masterpiece of a Commodore 64 game. Lovely. Whoa! Smart move, Douglas. Excellent job getting slaughtered. My joystick's bad. The frame rate because of my capture device. Let's see, what other excuse can I make up for why I died so quickly in this game? Now, when you're done with a specific game, you can just hit the center button out of the 3 buttons on the flash cartridge, and it will go right back into the mode where you can pick your game, and you can pick another game to play. Here's another cartridge file we'll try out. This one is Wizard from Progressive Peripherals and Software. And this is actually a really cool game and incredibly addicting once you figure out how it works. We'll just let the demo play there for a second so you can see how nicely it works. Got to collect all the little gems and avoid getting slaughtered. So that's kind of a fun little game. Let's go back to the main menu. Now, there are other kinds of cartridges that it supports. It'll emulate different kinds of easy flash cartridges. I've got a list scrolling here of the kinds that it officially supports. Epic's fast load, Ocean cartridges, that kind of thing. It probably supports more. Just give them a try. If you've got a CRT file, I mean, the worst it can do is not work, but any kind of game should theoretically work on here. Now, the PAL games that came with the device, those in general don't work very well for me. Since it's an NTSC machine, they just don't work well. But anything that's NTSC should work fine. Anything that's PAL on your PAL machine should work just fine. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Does this thing emulate an REU cartridge, which is the RAM expansion unit? And the answer is no. The thing only has like a 192K free of memory on it, or flash memory, however he's got it set up. And so it just doesn't have the capacity nor does it have the capability right now of emulating an REU. Maybe a version in the future may be able to do it, but I doubt if you'll be able to flash this one and get it to work as an REU. Now let's take a look at some of the other features of the device, now that we know that working with CRT files works just fine. This will emulate a 1541 drive, kind of the same way a Pi 1541 or an SD to IEC works, in a similar way, but not exact. And the reason it's not exact and not 100% reliable is because this thing is not actually on the IEC channel. It uses special code and special timings and everything to emulate a 1541 running on the cartridge slot, which is a little different way of doing things. Games and programs that use fast loaders or try and hit the hardware directly, they're just not going to work, or they're not going to work very well. Games that are, well, cracked and don't use fast loaders or have been designed to work like on the Mini or Maxi or something like that, they probably will work just fine. So it will work with .D64, .D71, and .D81 files. So it emulates a 1541, a 1571, or a 1581 drive. And usually it'll at least see the files. Now, whether or not the program will actually work after it sees the files, again, depends on the program. Now, I know another thing you guys are thinking right now, will it work with GEOS? If you've got one of those nice .D81 GEOS images, will it boot from that? And the answer is no. GEOS uses fast loading technology of its own design. It starts to boot GEOS and it says insert a disk with the desktop on it, and you're screwed. There's nothing you can do, you're just hosed. So let's take a closer look at how this actually works. Great. So let's take a look at how it works in the Kung Fu Flash interface. Now we're going to scroll up here, we're going to go back a level, we're going to go look at my .D64 files. So we'll take a look at how this works. Now, so I'm going to just browse through my folders here and find some of my D64 files. If I go in here, if I were to just hit the Enter key on any of these files, it would possibly try and launch the program, or you can tell it to just load that as a .D64 file and try and auto boot the drive, which is kind of cool. So I'm going to hit Enter here. Now it reboots. I'm going to have to power cycle it in this case, but then it should try and execute the file. And in some cases that works well, and in some cases it doesn't. Like in that case, it did not. Let's go back and try some .D64 files in my 1D64 folder here. Joystick port 2, let's find a good game. Here's the Gauntlet, the Deeper Dungeons. We're going to hit Enter on that and Enter here. Now in theory, it's going to try and launch Gauntlet. There's our Cracktro. See if it'll handle it. And it launches okay. Not too shabby. One player, let's be Questor the elf. Now, the other way to do it, instead of having it auto boot the game, is you can have it actually mount it for use in your regular Commodore 64 environment. And the way you do that is you scroll to the D64 you want to go to and you hit Shift Enter. Now it gives you a new option. Open, which will open the folder and let you look inside of it, or Mount, well, delete we don't want to do. Let's do Mount. Once we tell it to mount it, now our Commodore 64 in theory should see it on drive 8. Now we can list it. And there it is. It thinks there's a device 8 on here because I do have my other devices unhooked right now. And we can, in theory, run things right from here. So we're going to go to my favorite game, Miss Pac-Man, comma 8, comma 1, and we'll see if she loads. That took about 2 seconds, which is absolutely amazing when you think about it, that once you do try and load it off the cartridge, it loads almost instantly and works absolutely perfectly. So this is how I find I have to load a lot of the programs in games, not let it auto start it, but mount it as an actual disk. And then once you mount it as an actual disk and launch it manually, like you do with a normal Commodore 64, it works just fine. You ain't gonna get me. Don't even think about it. You're not gonna touch me. I got the moves. Now you can also designate a drive letter for the Kung Fu Flash. And that we're going to do by hitting the F5 key, and we're going to tell it device number, and we're going to change it to device number 10 because I have two other devices. I've got my 1541-2 on device 8 and my 1581 on device 9. Now I'm going to power it down and plug my drives back in. Now when you change the drive letter like I just did, mount it on device number 10, tell it to save, what you have to do is you have to remount the device. If you don't remount it, it's going to show up as drive 8 and just confuse the system. So we're going to remount the device. Now when I do device 8, that should look on my 1541-2. Yep, there's my stuff there. Now let's look at device 10, which I've set my Kung Fu Flash for. And it shows my programs right on here, and they should, in theory, if they're well-behaved programs, work properly. But remember, everything on the Commodore 64 really likes to be on device 8. So in this case, whoops. Let me try to actually do that right. Some things will work and some things will not work if you set it to device 9 or device 10. Hey, Froggy. Never actually played this version of Frogger. So in a nutshell, if you're going to use a different device number, just make sure that you remount your file. If you don't, it's going to remember the old device number you mounted it as and mess things up. Now, I find that a lot of programs, a lot of games that are looking for an actual physical device number will fail. Like on the Miss Pac-Man I was just running, that comes on a collection of multiple games. And when you launch the main program, it comes up with this menu. Okay, do you want to play Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, Frogger, Galaxian, whatever. And then it will use that menu to launch the program. I find that doesn't work because it's just a little bit of code in there, a little basic program, load, comma 8, comma 1, blah, blah, blah. Fails, can't find the device. Even though it is on device 8, because it's an emulated device, it just doesn't work. And I have to go into the program, into the directory and launch the program manually, specifically, then it works. It has something to do with the fact that it's not on a real IEC device channel. There's also been a couple of times where I've given it a directory to use to mount, and then when I relaunch it to try and look at the directory, it locks up the Commodore 64. It might be an NTSC thing, but I find if I just power it down, power it back up, it remembers the folder that I created and was looking at as a .d64, opens it right up, and everything works great. So probably something like that can be fixed in a little firmware patch. There's also a limitation that multi-disc games just don't work. If you've got 3 or 4 or 5 D64s for Ultima, it's not going to work on this, because if you go back into the menu to choose another device to use, it clears everything out of the Commodore 64's memory and you can't go back to where you were before. So right now there's no automatic switching and no manual switching of disks. Now you can get around that because there are some collections of .d81 files where they take a ton of these multi-disc games and convert them into one big .d81 file so you don't have to do any disk swapping. I've tested them, they work pretty well. I've got maybe 40 or 50% of my collection to actually work that way. Now on my SD to IEC, I can get about 80% of them to work. So there's still some compatibility issues that hopefully they'll iron out. So one may think that you could just use this to create real disks with. We got 2 nice drives here, drive 8 and drive 9. We can set this up on drive 10 and mount a .d64 file on here as drive 10. So why not just use a cool utility like draw copy to make a real disk out of it and be able to use some of the programs that way. That way we could use the Kung Fu Flash as kind of a big hard drive and then create files and programs as we need them. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to work. Let's take a look. So I've got Draw Copy on here, one of my favorite programs to use. We're going to go ahead and mount this. Mount, okay, now let's load, make sure we can see it, comma 10. Yep, there's Draw Copy. So this is working perfectly. It sees it as device number 10. It runs Draw Copy just fine. Yippee skippy. Okay, sees my 1541 drive perfectly. Hit the F3 key to change devices. It sees my 1581 drive perfectly. Now we'll switch to drive 10 and it goes back to drive 8. You see, it only switches between 8 and 9, even though that virtual device 10 exists and it's running the darn program from device 10. There doesn't seem to be a way to see it. I've even tried it setting it just to device 8. It just doesn't see anything then. When I quit it and I look at device 10 again, I mean, it's there. It thinks it's device 10. It just doesn't work. So let's recap here. The Kung Fu Flash does an exemplary job of emulating CRT cartridges. You can put almost any cartridge game on here as a CRT file. It's probably going to work just fine, and it works beautifully for that. You want to use it as an easy flash, great. You want to use it as an Epix fast loader, fine, whatever, works great for that. You want to put Sarah Jane Avorys 512K Soul Force on here, perfect. This alone is worth the price of admission. It's very, very useful for the price of this product. Now, add on to that the feature that it will run many .d64 files, many .d81 files, not all, but many of them, and do a good job of doing it. Icing on the cake. It's a great feature that's added on that will become more useful in the future when they work out a few of the kinks. Now, is it going to replace my SD to IEC? Not a chance. It just won't, because I find this works with about half as many D64s and D81s as my SD to IEC. On that device, I want to run GEOS on there? No problem at all. Set her up as device 8, use GEOS as a .d81. I'm in like Flynn. Works fine. This one, things like that just don't work. So it won't be replacing it. It will be supplementing it. So the mounting features are useful, but not useful enough to make it replace your other devices. So just think of it as bonus content, much like when occasionally, every once in a while, I go beyond 10 minutes in one of my videos. Anything beyond 10 minutes, free bonus content, occasionally when I go over. And now Kim has a GitHub page where you can put on your problems and bugs that you find, and he'll look at them and hopefully address them. So I encourage all of you who use the Kung Fu Flash, if you find a problem or something that doesn't work, just put something on the GitHub page, say, hey, I had this problem with this, and either it'll be something he can look at and maybe fix, or he'll tell you, that game's not gonna work, don't even bother. Of course, I would like to thank my wonderful patrons who are just absolutely fantastic. You can see these guys right here. They're just, I mean, how cool are these guys? If you want to join this illustrious list of patrons, just pop on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/10mark. $2 a month, you're on the list. Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I hope you learned a little bit about the Kung Fu Flash. I recommend everybody in PAL countries order this right away, because it works better than the NTSC version, because we're still in beta. All you Americans, go ahead and order one anyways. Kim is working on this and updating it, and maybe 1 or 2 updates a month is what I've seen. And every time, NTSC compatibility's gotten better. Pretty soon, it's going to be a perfect device, and it's really, really reasonable. And you might even get a coffee mug with it too. How can you go wrong? Please like and subscribe. Leave a comment below. Tell me all about your solutions that you use for accessing files on your old Commodore 64 equipment, and what new solutions you use for that. But until next time, this is Doug from 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out.